6 months earlier, I sat in Dean's cramped office on the third floor of a converted warehouse in Brooklyn. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead. I'd been his assistant editor for 8 months, cutting together other people's visions, staying late, learning. That day I brought something different. During lunch, I nervously pulled out a folder containing my short film concept, The Mirror Room. It was a psychological drama about a woman who discovers her reflection living a different life, making different choices, and slowly the two realities merge. I'd worked on it for 2 years. Dean looked up from his phone when I placed the folder on his desk. "What's this?" he asked, eyes narrowing with curiosity. My heart pounded. "It's a short film concept I wrote," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I thought maybe you could look at it, give me feedback." He opened the folder slowly. For 10 minutes, he read in complete silence while I sat there, palms sweating, second-guessing everything. Finally, he looked up and smiled. "You wrote this." I nodded, heart racing. "Harper, this is really good. The concept is fresh, the dialogue feels authentic. Let's develop it together." Those 4 words, develop it together, felt like a door opening. I believed him completely. That was my first mistake. The next 2 weeks felt like a dream. Dean scheduled development meetings where we'd discuss character arcs and visual themes. He asked thoughtful questions about my protagonist's motivations, the symbolic meaning of the mirror. Felt seen, heard, valued. We'd grab sandwiches from the deli downstairs and talk for hours. He told me about his connections in the festival circuit, how a strong short could open doors for both of us. "This could be our big break," he said one afternoon. I remembered thinking how generous it was that he said our instead of your. Then I noticed something small. In an email to the production coordinator about scheduling, he wrote, "I'm developing a new project. Not we. Just I." I stared at that sentence, telling myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was just shorthand, nothing to worry about. The next day, he sent me the revised script. I opened the file and my stomach dropped. The header read, "The Mirror Room, written by Dean Ralston." I scrolled down, searching for my name. Nothing. Not even based on a concept by credit. My hands shook. I walked to his office, script clutched tight. "Dean, there's been a mistake. The script header just has your name." He barely looked up. "Oh, that's just a placeholder, Harper. We'll fix it later. Don't worry about the technical stuff right now." His voice was so casual, so dismissive. My gut twisted, but I stayed quiet. I wanted to believe him desperately, so I kept working. I stayed late, refining dialogue, suggesting camera angles, helping him visualize scenes. Every contribution I made, he absorbed without acknowledgement. During pre-production meetings with our small crew, Dean presented my ideas as his own. "I think the mirror should crack during the final confrontation," he'd say. Exactly what I'd suggested the night before. The cinematographer nodded appreciatively. "Brilliant visual metaphor, Dean." I sat there silent, coffee going cold in my hands. One afternoon, the producer, Veronica Kane, complimented a particular scene's pacing. "That's the kind of authentic emotion that separates good films from great ones," she said, looking at Dean. "You've really captured something raw here." Dean smiled modestly. "I wanted it to feel lived in, you know? Real." Those were my exact words from our first meeting. I'd written them in my original treatment. He'd memorized my vision and was selling it as his own. Inside I was boiling. My face felt hot, chest tight. But outside I kept smiling, nodding, playing the supportive assistant. I told myself confrontation would only hurt my career. Looking back, I was lying to myself. But that lie wouldn't last much longer. Filming began on a Monday in late September. The set was an old apartment in Queens. Hardwood floors, tall windows. I arrived early each day, setting up equipment, organizing footage. Dean treated me like a production assistant, not a creative partner. "Harper, grab me coffee." "Harper, we need more memory cards." "Harper, make sure the crew has lunch ordered." I did it all without complaint, thinking that when the film succeeded, my contribution would be recognized. Then he'd give me proper credit. During editing, Dean asked me to stay late to fine-tune the pacing. Everyone else had gone home. Just us in the dark editing suite, monitor glow the only light. I worked until sunrise, cutting scenes, adjusting rhythms, creating emotional beats that made the story breathe. My eyes burned, my back ached, but I was editing my own story, pouring myself into every frame. The next morning, Dean arrived with coffee and a bagel. "You're a lifesaver, Harper," he said cheerfully, looking at the refined cut. "This is exactly what it needed. Not "you're a writer," not "you're a creative partner," just lifesaver. Like I'd done him a favor instead of saved his film. I took the coffee and said nothing. But something inside me hardened that morning. The premiere invitation arrived via email 3 weeks before the screening. Subject line: The Mirror Room, Festival Premiere Night. I opened it with trembling hands, scrolling through the guest list. Producers, distributors, critics, industry professionals. My name wasn't there. I read the list 3 times, certain I'd missed it. Nothing. My name is Harper Wells. I'm 28 years old, an assistant film editor who'd spent the last 8 months watching her creation get stolen piece by piece. I walked to Dean's office, heart racing. "Dean, I didn't see my name on the premiere guest list." He didn't look up. "Oh, you'll be in the control booth managing the technical side. It's where you're most valuable, Harper. That's where you belong." Where I belong. Those words echoed in my head for days. Not on the red carpet. Not being interviewed about the story I created. In a dark booth, behind the scenes, invisible. I wanted to scream. I wanted to quit. Instead, I thanked him and went back to my desk. That night, I did something I should have done months earlier. I gathered every draft of the original concept, every email where I'd pitched ideas, every time-stamped file. I backed everything up twice. External hard drive, secure cloud account. Then I registered my original script with the Writers Guild, complete with proof of creation dates. No confrontation. No drama. Just evidence. Revenge isn't rage. Strategy. Premiere night arrived cold and bright. I stood outside the theater in Manhattan, watching Dean pose for photographers on the red carpet. He wore an expensive suit I knew he couldn't afford. Someone had sponsored him, believing in his vision. Inside, I adjusted sound levels in the control booth while celebrities and critics took their seats. A production assistant brought me a headset. You'll cue the start when Dean gives the signal. So I was reduced to this, pressing play on my own stolen film. The lights dimmed. Dean stood at the front, microphone in hand. "Thank you all for being here tonight. This film has been a labor of love, a deeply personal exploration of identity and choice. I'm incredibly proud to share it with you." The audience applauded. No mention of me. No acknowledgement of collaboration. I pressed play, and my story unfolded on screen. Every line of dialogue I'd written, every emotional beat I'd crafted, every symbolic image I'd conceived, all attributed solely to Dean Ralston. When credits rolled, there was my name buried at the bottom. Assistant Editor, Harper Wells. Nothing more. The applause was deafening. Dean took a bow. I sat in the darkness, tears streaming down my face, watching my dream become someone else's triumph. At the after-party, a rooftop bar in Soho, Dean gestured me over to producers. "Everyone, this is Harper Wells, my assistant editor," he said, hand on my shoulder. "She's got a good eye for pacing." One producer, an older man with gray hair and expensive watch, smiled politely. "That's wonderful. But good eyes don't write scripts, do they?" He laughed. Others joined in. Dean laughed too. I stood there, face burning, fingernails digging into my palms so hard I thought I might draw blood. "No," I said quietly, forcing a smile. "They don't." I excused myself, found the bathroom, locked myself in a stall. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Don't cry. Don't break. Not here. Not in front of them. When I emerged, I avoided Dean, nursing a single glass of wine in the corner, watching him bask in praise that should have been shared. A journalist from an indie film magazine approached him. "The emotional authenticity is remarkable. Where did you find your inspiration?" Dean didn't hesitate. "Personal experience mostly. And lots of late nights figuring out how to translate internal conflict into visual language. Every word was a lie. Every compliment stolen." I watched, memorizing his exact words for later. Reviews appeared the next morning. A stunning debut from director Dean Ralston. The Mirror Room showcases a fresh voice in independent cinema. Ralston's script crackles with authentic dialogue and psychological depth. I read every review alone in my apartment, coffee going cold. They praised his vision, his writing, his direction. My name appeared nowhere. One critic wrote, "Ralston proves that great filmmaking is about understanding human nature at its most vulnerable." I'd written that understanding into every scene, every character choice. But it was his now. I poured wine, then poured it out into the sink. I couldn't afford impulsive mistakes. Anger wouldn't help. Emotional outbursts wouldn't reclaim what was mine. I needed to be smarter, more patient. So I went to my computer and started a new document. I titled it Evidence Log and began cataloging everything. Emails, drafts, notes, timestamps. Every piece of proof that the Mirror Room originated from my imagination, not his. I organized it chronologically, creating a narrative that told the truth. The story wrote itself. I just had to make sure the world would eventually read it. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. And justice requires proof. Dean's success grew quickly. The Mirror Room won awards at smaller festivals. Best Short Film at Brooklyn Independent. Audience Choice at Boston Underground. Each win inflated his ego further. He started giving interviews, appearing on indie film podcasts, talking about his creative process. I watched every interview, listened to every podcast, saved every transcript. In one particularly galling episode, he described his writing approach. "I believe in mining your own emotional truth. The best stories come from your own struggles, your own questions about identity." Those were my exact words from our second development meeting. I'd written them in my journal that same night. He hired a publicist. His social media following exploded. Film students analyzed the Mirror Room in online forums, dissecting themes, praising Ralston's brilliant metaphorical structure. I read their discussions late at night, simultaneously proud my work resonated and furious Dean received all credit. One student wrote, "Ralston understands the female psyche in a way most male directors don't." The irony almost killed me. Of course he understood. He'd stolen it from an actual woman. I saved that comment too. Everything went into my evidence file. Every praise, every interview, every stolen word. I was building something bigger than anger now. 3 months after the premiere, Dean made a crucial mistake. He uploaded a behind-the-scenes video to YouTube, showing early development meetings. In one clip, the camera panned across a whiteboard covered in character notes and story structure. My handwriting, my initials in the corner, HW, next to key plot points. He'd been so focused on showcasing his creative process that he never noticed the evidence he was broadcasting. I downloaded the video immediately, saved it in multiple locations, and quietly smiled. He was handing me ammunition without realizing it. Around this time, Veronica Kane invited Dean to a networking dinner with executives from a small production company. To my surprise, he asked me to come. "It'll be good for you to meet people," he said, like he was doing me a favor. At the dinner, he introduced me to executives. "This is Harper, my editor. She's got a good eye for story structure." One executive, Claudia Brooks, asked me directly, "Do you write?" Before I could answer, Dean cut in. "Harper's primarily technical. She's excellent at execution." Claudia nodded politely and turned back to Dean. I sat there invisible again, hands folded in my lap, face a careful mask. But inside I was cataloging every dismissal, every slight. The evidence file grew. I started fighting back quietly. I joined screenwriting forums and online communities, creating anonymous accounts. I posted portions of my original concept, specifically earliest drafts with timestamps from 2 years prior, before I'd ever met Dean. I didn't announce it loudly. I just let it exist in public spaces, building a digital trail that predated the Mirror Room's premiere. I was constructing a timeline, a narrative anyone paying attention could piece together. The truth was there, scattered across the internet like breadcrumbs, waiting to be discovered. Meanwhile, Dean's success continued climbing. A film critic for a major publication wrote a think piece titled, "The Mirror Room: When Indie Film Gets It Right." The article praised everything: script's emotional intelligence, visual storytelling, authentic female perspective. But then came one sentence that changed everything. Though impressive, something about the film feels stolen. Authentic in emotion but hollow in authorship, as if Ralston is channeling a voice not quite his own. I read that sentence 20 times. Someone had noticed. Someone sensed the truth beneath the surface. Dean saw the review and went ballistic in our group chat. This critic doesn't understand artistic vision. They're looking for problems that don't exist. I stayed silent, sipping tea in my apartment, watching the first crack appear in his facade. It was beginning. The real break came at an after-party following a screening in Philadelphia. Dean had been drinking steadily, his guard lowering with each glass of whiskey. I watched from across the room as he cornered Marcus Reeves, an acclaimed cinematographer, and started bragging. I couldn't hear the full conversation, but I saw Dean laughing, gesturing wildly, completely unaware that Marcus had pulled out his phone. The next morning I received an anonymous email. No message, just a video attachment. I opened it with shaking hands. There was Dean, slightly drunk, grinning at the camera. Honestly, the girl had a cute draft. Real amateur stuff, but the bones were there. I just turned it into something actually watchable. That's what directors do. They take raw material and make it art. I played the video 3 times, hands trembling. He'd confessed. Drunk and careless. He'd admitted on camera that the concept originated with the girl, me. Marcus had recorded it and sent it anonymously, probably recognizing the injustice. This was the evidence I'd been waiting for. But I didn't release it immediately. I was learning patience. Timing mattered more than anger. I saved the video in multiple secure locations and waited for the perfect moment. Dean's arrogance would provide that moment. I just had to be ready. That moment arrived 2 months later. The Mirror Room received a nomination for Best Short Film at the Tribeca Film Festival, one of the most prestigious platforms for independent filmmakers. Dean was ecstatic, posting celebratory messages across social media, thanking everyone who'd supported his vision. The festival scheduled a live Q&A panel with nominated directors, streamed online and attended by industry professionals, critics, film enthusiasts. Dean invited me to the festival to celebrate our success. Our success. The words felt like poison, but I accepted with a smile. I offered to help prepare his presentation materials, including a highlight reel that would play before his panel. "That would be great, Harper," he said enthusiastically. "You always know how to make things look polished." I spent 3 days editing the reel, carefully selecting clips, arranging them perfectly. But I also added something Dean would never notice until too late: the behind-the-scenes footage showing my handwriting on the whiteboard, and at the very end, buried in what appeared to be B-roll, a 5-second clip of Dean's drunken confession. The girl had a cute draft. I just turned it into art. The trap was set. I just had to wait for him to spring it himself. The panel took place on a Saturday afternoon in a packed theater. Dean sat on stage with 3 other filmmakers, looking confident and polished in his tailored jacket. I sat in the audience, 3 rows back, heart hammering. The moderator asked thoughtful questions about creative process, visual storytelling, character development. Dean answered eloquently, charming the audience with anecdotes that were half truth, half fiction. Then came the question I'd been waiting for. A journalist from Filmmaker magazine raised her hand. "Dean, your film has such an authentic female perspective. Where did the original concept originate?" Dean smiled, completely comfortable. "From my imagination, honestly. I've always been fascinated by the idea of alternate selves, roads not taken. I spent months developing the concept before production." The audience nodded appreciatively. The moderator smiled. "Let's take a look at some behind-the-scenes footage that shows Dean's creative process." The lights dimmed. The screen flickered to life. My carefully edited highlight reel began playing. Beautiful shots of filming, Dean directing actors, artistic shots of the mirror prop. The audience watched, engaged. And then, exactly as I'd planned, the footage shifted. The whiteboard appeared. My handwriting, my initials, my story structure. Few people leaned forward, confused. Then came Dean's voice, crystal clear. "The girl had a cute draft. I just turned it into art." The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. Dean's face went pale. Eyes locked on the screen in horror. The moderator looked confused, glancing between Dean and the footage. The journalist who'd asked the question pulled out her phone, already typing. The audience began murmuring, whispers spreading like wildfire. Did he just say, "Wait, who's the girl? Is this real?" Dean stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly. That was taken out of context," he stammered, voice cracking. "That's not, I can explain." But the damage was done. The clip had been broadcast live, streamed to thousands of viewers online. Within minutes, screen recordings began circulating on social media. Someone in the audience had filmed it on their phone. The moderator tried to regain control. "Dean, can you clarify what we just heard?" He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came. I sat perfectly still, face carefully neutral, watching his world implode in real time. A producer in the front row turned around, scanning the audience. "Who's Harper Wells?" she called out. "Is she here?" I raised my hand slowly, standing. Every eye in the theater turned toward me. "I'm Harper Wells. I'm the writer of the Mirror Room's original concept." The murmuring exploded into full conversation. Reporters surged toward me, phones out, questions flying. Dean tried to speak, to explain, but his voice drowned out by chaos. Security moved in to restore order. I walked calmly up the aisle toward the exit, refusing to engage with shouted questions. I'd said what needed saying. The rest would speak for itself. Outside the theater, my phone exploded with notifications. The clip was trending on social media under #TheRealWriter. Articles were already being published. Film festival shocker. Director admits stealing concept. People were digging through my anonymous forum posts, connecting timestamps, piecing together the full story. The narrative was rewriting itself in real time, and I didn't have to say another word. The evidence spoke louder than any accusation ever could. I turned off my phone and walked through city streets, feeling lighter than I had in months. The truth was finally out. Not through angry accusations or courtroom battles, but through Dean's own words, his own arrogance. He'd hung himself with the rope I'd patiently fed him. Justice didn't roar. It whispered, but everyone heard it. I stopped at a coffee shop, ordered a latte, and sat by the window watching the world continue. My phone buzzed constantly in my bag, but I left it there. Whatever was happening could wait. For the first time in 6 months I could breathe. The fallout was swift and brutal. By Monday morning, the production company that had been courting Dean for his next project pulled out entirely. A statement appeared on their website. "We are committed to supporting original voices and authentic storytelling. We have decided not to move forward with Mr. Ralston at this time." Sponsors who'd backed the Mirror Room's festival run withdrew support. Dean's agent dropped him. The film was pulled from consideration for several upcoming awards. His carefully constructed career collapsed in less than 72 hours. His apology statement appeared Tuesday afternoon on social media. It was clearly written by a lawyer. Formal, hollow, avoiding real accountability. I deeply regret any confusion regarding development of the mirror room. Harper Wells contributed ideas during the early conceptual phase, and I should have been more clear about crediting collaborative work. I apologize for the oversight and any pain this has caused. Collaborative work. Oversight. The language was carefully chosen to minimize his theft while appearing contrite. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't need to. The court of public opinion had already ruled, and the evidence was overwhelming. His words meant nothing now. The truth had spoken louder than any apology ever could. While Dean's career crumbled, mine was just beginning. Film journalists requested interviews, wanting to hear my side. I gave a few carefully chosen ones, speaking calmly and factually, never descending into bitterness or anger. I presented the evidence. Timestamped drafts, email chains, registration documents. I'm not interested in destroying anyone, I told one interviewer. I just want the truth recognized and original voices protected. The response was overwhelming. Film students, aspiring writers, industry professionals reached out with support. Several offered connections, opportunities, mentorship. A producer named Troy Hamilton contacted me directly. He ran an independent production company specializing in elevated genre films. I'd love to option your next concept, he wrote. And I want you attached as writer-director. Full creative control. I read his email 3 times, hardly believing it was real. We met the following week at a cafe in the West Village. Troy was genuine, passionate about authentic storytelling. What happened to you was theft, he said bluntly. But your concept was brilliant. Your execution in reclaiming it was even more brilliant. I want to work with people who understand their own value. I signed the option agreement 2 weeks later. My next film would be mine, completely and undeniably. 3 months after the festival disaster, I sat in a real office. My office. In a small production space in Williamsburg. The walls were bare except for a framed poster of my favorite film and a corkboard where I'd pinned story ideas. I was developing my next project, a feature-length psychological thriller about power dynamics and artistic theft. The irony wasn't lost on me. Troy's company was backing it fully, with a modest but workable budget. I'd assembled a small team of collaborators who respected my vision, who listened when I spoke, who credited my ideas openly. One afternoon, my assistant buzzed me. There's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment. I looked up from script notes. Who is it? There was a pause. Dean Ralston. My stomach tightened. I considered turning him away, but curiosity won. Send him in. Dean walked into my office looking nothing like the confident director I'd known. His hair was unkempt, clothes rumpled. He'd lost weight. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. Harper, he said quietly, not meeting my gaze. Can we talk? I gestured to the chair across from my desk. He sat heavily, hands clasped in his lap. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, Dean broke the silence. You destroyed me, he said, voice barely above a whisper. I leaned back in my chair, studying him. No, Dean. You destroyed yourself. I just made sure the truth came out. He looked up then, eyes red-rimmed. I've lost everything. My agent, my projects, my reputation. Nobody will work with me. His voice cracked on the last word. You stole my work, I said calmly. You took credit for my creativity, my vision, my words. You paraded around festivals accepting praise for something you didn't create. What did you expect would happen when people found out? He flinched. I know I was wrong. I wanted it so badly. The success, the recognition. I thought if I could just get one break, just one film that people noticed. So you took mine, I finished. He nodded miserably. I'm sorry, Harper. I'm truly sorry. I believed he was sorry. Sorry he'd been caught, sorry he'd lost everything. But I wasn't sure he understood the real harm he'd caused. Sorry wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Do you know what the worst part was? Asked him. It wasn't just the theft. It was being invisible. Standing in that premiere, watching my story unfold. Having my name buried at the bottom of credits. Being introduced as my assistant. When I'd created the entire concept. Watching you absorb praise that should have been shared. That's what you took from me. Not just credit, but dignity. Dean's hands trembled. I didn't think about it like that. I got caught up in the momentum. People were celebrating me, and it felt so good. And I convinced myself I deserved it because I'd directed it. I'd brought your concept to life. But you never would have had anything to bring to life without me, I interrupted. And you made sure nobody knew that. He nodded, tears streaming down his face now. What do you want from me, Harper? What can I possibly do to make this right? I considered the question. What did I want? An apology was meaningless without changed behavior. Money couldn't undo the damage. I want you to leave, I said finally. I want you to understand that actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences are permanent. You made choices, Dean. Now you live with them. He stood slowly like an old man. At the door he paused and looked back. For what it's worth, the mirror room really was brilliant. Your concept, your characters, they were special. I know, I said simply. After he left, I sat alone in my office for a long time, processing the conversation. I didn't feel the satisfaction I'd imagined. His downfall hadn't healed the wound of his betrayal. But I did feel something else, closure. The chapter was finished. I'd reclaimed my voice, my story, my name. What Dean did with the ruins of his career wasn't my concern anymore. I turned back to my script, reading through the latest draft. The protagonist was finding her power, learning to trust her own voice despite everyone telling her to stay quiet. It was cathartic, writing this story, pouring my experience into fiction that felt like truth. My phone buzzed with a text from Troy. Script notes are fantastic. Let's schedule the pitch meeting with financiers for next month. This film is going to be special. I smiled, saving my work. Special. Original. Those 3 words meant everything now. I'd fought for them, earned them, protected them, and nobody could ever take them away again. 4 months later, I stood backstage at the Women in Film Summit, waiting to go on stage for a panel discussion titled Authenticity in Art, Protecting Your Creative Voice. My palms were sweaty, but not from fear. This was different from premiere night when I'd hidden in the control booth. This time I was here as a recognized creator, invited to share my experience. The moderator introduced me. Please welcome Harper Wells, writer, director, and creator of The Mirror Room, whose advocacy for creative ownership has sparked important conversations about authorship and ethics in independent film. The applause was genuine and warm. I walked onto the stage, squinting against lights, and saw an audience of young filmmakers, writers, artists, people like me trying to make their voices heard in a crowded industry. During the Q&A, a young woman in the 3rd row raised her hand. What's the most important lesson you learned from your experience? I thought carefully before answering. Document everything. Every draft, every email, every conversation where you pitch an idea. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. And never ever let someone else narrate your worth. Your voice matters, your stories matter, and you deserve credit for what you create. The applause that followed felt different from any I'd heard before. It felt earned. The panel ended with more applause, and afterward, dozens of people approached me with their own stories of stolen ideas, uncredited work, creative theft. I listened to each one, offered what advice I could, shared contact information for organizations that protected writers' rights. One young filmmaker, barely 22, told me she'd been about to give her concept to a director who promised to develop it together. She paused, looking at me with tears in her eyes. Your story made me realize I needed to protect myself first. I registered my script this morning. That conversation stayed with me as I left the venue. I'd never wanted to become a cautionary tale, but if my experience could help even one person avoid the same theft, then maybe the pain had purpose. Back at my office, I reviewed notes from the pitch meeting we'd held earlier that week. The financiers had loved my thriller concept. We'd secured enough funding to begin pre-production next month. I'd be directing my first feature film, with my name on every document, every contract, every creative decision firmly under my control. This was what I'd been fighting for. Not revenge, but recognition. Not destruction, but creation. My own creation. 6 months after the Tribeca disaster, I attended my own film premiere. Not the mirror room. That would always carry the stain of Dean's theft, even with my name now properly credited in revised materials. No, this was the premiere of Reflection, my new short film funded by Troy's production company. I'd written it, directed it, maintained complete creative control from concept to final cut. As I walked the small red carpet at the Independent Theater in Lower Manhattan, photographers called my name. Harper. Over here. Harper, who are you wearing? Inside, I sat in the front row beside Troy and my lead actress. The lights dimmed, and my name appeared on screen. Written and directed by Harper Wells. The audience applauded, but this time it was for me. Not for someone who'd stolen my work, but for my authentic vision, my voice, my story. As the film played, I watched the audience react, gasping at tense moments, laughing at dark humor, leaning forward during climactic scenes. When credits rolled and applause began, I stood and took a small bow, heart full not with vindication, but with satisfaction. Later, at the after-party, a journalist asked about my plans. "What's next for you, Harper?" I smiled, thinking about the feature film in development, about other concepts filling my notebooks, about young writers I'd begun mentoring. Everything, I said simply. Everything I should have had from the beginning. Justice hadn't roared. It had whispered, patient and persistent, until everyone heard it. And now, finally, my voice was my own.